There has been much talk about the JonBenét Ramsey case, but there have been no arrests. The current issue of Vanity Fair magazine features a tell-all article about the case, which includes the ransom note in its entirety and bold implications as to the guilt or innocence of John and Patsy Ramsey. Now, for a conversation about the article in Vanity Fair and allegations surrounding it, joining me, the author, journalist Anne-Louise Bardack, and in Washington, former FBI profiler Greg McCrary. I am pleased to have both of them here talk about this extraordinary case, which we're beginning in the recent days to learn more and more. Tell me first, Anne-Louise, what brought you to do this?
Well, it was kind of an unusual turn of events for me, but basically after months and months went by and this case just stalemated, and we learned no information, or very, very little bits of information parceled out, and as it stayed in the headlines, it became unavoidable. It became like, I started thinking about it, it's like Lindbergh.
Yeah.
I mean, how does this one child magnetize the entire country? And my roots I had come out of crime reporting, even though I haven't done it in a while, myself and Graydon Carter were just saying, is there ever going to be a solution to this case? And it was really the lack of information and basically what has been going on for most of these months is what we call, press release journalism, and just a dearth of information.
I got thousands of questions.
Okay.
Let me start with the notion of what's gotten a lot of publicity, a lot of attention, the ransom note.
Yes.
How did that come to public attention, A, and what did it say, B, and C, what's new about what we know?
Well, what's new in this issue of Vanity Fair was the very first time that the ransom note is published in full. We've been getting little morsels and bits of it. The district attorney has released this line or that line. And what we see for the first time in this issue is the extent of this note. And in fact, this is an extraordinary document. It's 3 pages long. It rambles on and on. It is clearly amateurish and adolescent. And if you look at the note, and I'm sure Greg McCrary can address this better than I, you can see that it starts off with one kind of penmanship, and it visibly changes as you get to the 3rd page. But, ransom notes are typically very brief. They're, to the point, I have your child, give me the money.
Right.
They don't ramble on.
Right.
So clearly somebody spent a considerable amount of time hanging out in the kitchen, writing and composing a ransom note right after killing this child.
How did you get it?
Well, that's the $64,000 question.
It certainly is.
And everybody's asking me it, and I'm very distressed because there's an investigation going on in Colorado to try to find the source.
Because the prosecutor's not thrilled that it's been released. Is that correct to say, or not?
They're up in arms, and there's an internal affairs investigation going on, I am told, to try to find this. And it's disturbing to me because there has been a steady stream of leaks, but if the leaks come from either the district attorney's office, where they usually do, well, then that's okay, or from the Ramsey family. But if they're suspected to come from possibly the police department, well, then the Ramsey family wants a criminal investigation in it. But obviously I can't, reveal the sources who provided this to me, but clearly they came to me out of complete and utter desperation over why after 9 months there have been no arrests or prosecution.
Before I go to Mr. McCrary, what are the implications of this ransom note? What do you think is implied by it?
What it tells me is that that this was it's a bogus note. That this was never a real kidnapping. That this is a cover-up.
And the note was turned over by the Ramseys, was it not?
It was found there.
Right.
Patsy Ramsey reported on that morning that, she had actually 2 versions which are outlined in the story. She told police initially, according to police reports, the first time she said she went in to her daughter's room, found her not present, and ran down to the kitchen, and on the back spiral stairs found the ransom note laid out all 3 pages. Later she said that in fact she went down to make coffee at 5:30 and stumbled on the ransom note and then ran upstairs and found her child missing. That discrepancy has gotten a bit of attention. That's according to the police reports.
Yeah, Mr. McCrary, I want you to speak. First of all, thank you for joining us.
Sure.
I want you to speak to 2 things. Number 1 is the ransom note and what you know about that. And secondly, the phone call you had about joining this investigation.
Yes, and I'll take them in that order. The note, the first thing that's striking about the note is that it even exists. We have over 25,000 homicides a year in the United States. Very few involve a bogus ransom note or demand note. So it's unusual in that it even exists. And it's important to look at the note in the context, in that sort of a context, and then into the note itself. So one, the fact that it even exists is significant. And then the content of the note itself, very respectful. It's Mr. Ramsey, we respect your business, and so forth. Very respectful and deferential to Mr. Ramsey. The figure. The $118,000 figure is an oddball figure. Kidnap for ransoms are usually big, fat, round numbers, millions of dollars asked, and then the tone is one that lacks criminal sophistication, although the writer's articulate, well-spoken. There's good sentence structure, grammar, syntax, all that vocabulary all indicates a well-educated offender. This is not anyone crazy or irrational or mentally disordered, but it's staging. And staging is the alteration of the crime scene. The purpose of the note is to mislead investigators, to make them think this is a kidnap for ransom, when in fact it's been a homicide. And the reason offenders stage crime scenes is because without it, they're the primary suspect. So they have to come up with a false motive to try and mislead investigators. And that really is what this note means.
A false motive to mislead investigators.
Yes.
Okay. Your involvement in this, the phone call or the message you received.
Right. I really haven't had any direct involvement at all, but I was called early in January by an attorney, actually a private investigator working for an attorney for the Ramseys, and they wanted to hire me to work with the Ramsey team to construct a profile, do a crime analysis, and so forth. I declined that offer. As a matter of fact, I had my secretary call back and decline the offer, and I did that for two reasons, basically. One, to construct a profile, I would have needed access to all the investigative materials, that is, the crime scene photos, autopsy report, autopsy photos, all the investigation that the police had done, none of which would have been available to me working with the attorneys that wanted to hire me. And second, my experience and what I know about child homicides. First of all, we know there's a 12-to-1 probability that when we have a child murder that is done by a family member or a caregiver or someone close to the child, only 1 in 12 is committed by a stranger. And then when we overlay the facts, even as I knew them early on, that the murder occurred in the house, everything seemed to have occurred in the house. The note was in the house. The note was written on a pad from the house. Everything was in the house. And my instinct told me that the killer is going to be in the house or someone very, very close to the child. So I didn't want to get in a position where I was in the camp of a killer and somehow inadvertently defending a child killer.
All right, I want to open this up to both of you, but I want to come back, Ann Louise, just to one question. For anyone who doesn't know this case, just sort of skip through the operative facts about this.
This is a case that's, grabbed headlines like the Lindbergh case, because it's a beautiful young child, and it's a child. that in fact a beauty pageant winner that since the age of 4 has been in numerous beauty pageants and was destined to go all the way to Miss America, whose mother was in fact Miss West Virginia, whose aunt was Miss West Virginia, and both of whom competed in the Miss America. So this was a child. One of the family business associates does talk about that this child from day one was, put on the pageant track. And I think the fact that all of America has seen these photographs of this child seductively in these, outfits, at the age of 4, 5, 6, it scandalized the country. I think that there's been a huge shock to the family that that the rest of the country didn't share their kind of, antebellum lifestyle. And they are so hurt, just so hurt by the reaction to their child. Sometimes I wonder it's almost as affected them almost as much as her actual loss.
And what do we know about her death?
We know that John and Patsy Ramsey with JonBenét and their son Burke had dinner that night with their best friends Fleet and Priscilla White around a mile away from their very lovely neighborhood in Boulder, Colorado. That they got home around 10 o'clock. And Patsy Ramsey said, said she woke up the next morning. First, we have the version, the police officer wrote first that, she went in the room and then found the note. And then he wrote, there's another version where she found the note, whatever. There's some confusion on that. And that's just at 5:45 in the morning. The only other piece of information we have that's absolutely hard, and which is revealed in this story also, is that a neighbor in the back actually heard a scream shortly after midnight. Told the police that she heard a scream shortly after midnight from the direction of the Ramsey house. But when the police investigators asked the Ramseys, they said they didn't hear any such scream. In fact, contrary to some information being recently published, the police did interview the neighbors in the surrounding area. I can't speak to whether they interviewed the entire neighborhood, but in fact, all the homes adjacent to the Ramsey home were interviewed because I spoke to them about that, the neighbors themselves.
Ramseys, of course, have denied this, that they are the killers.
Yes. Yes, they have proclaimed their innocence in an early interview that they did, but on TV, not with the police.
Of course. And what you get there, and you're on this story, and you're writing about this, do most people that you talk to believe the Ramseys did it?
Almost entirely. That's my understanding. When I'm in, not just in New York or California or anywhere else. When I'm in Colorado, what I try to do is take a random poll, and so I'll ask the waitress and the hotel people, etc., who live in the town, and I'll just say, "Well, who do you think did this?" And they invariably say the parents. And the defense team has said that they had conceded that this is the popular perception of the entire country, that the parents did it. But you must remember the Ramsey defense team. They haven't been charged yet, but they do have a defense team. Yeah. There are there's 8 lawyers that I am aware of that work for the Ramseys. There are 3 publicists. There are 2 handwriting experts. There is an FBI profiler. When Greg McCrary turned down the job, John Douglas took it. There is a huge $1 million team here at work that works around the clock to put out the message that the John and Patsy Ramsey are innocent and to present their point of view and to try to, do their spin on this. So they've had some success, I suppose, but I think that nevertheless, with all that money and energy going, it still is the perception that they are guilty.
Are you surprised how long it's taken and the fact that there's been no indictment yet?
There is no statute of limitations on homicide on one hand. On the other hand, I would think at this point the investigation has to be pretty much wrapped up. All the lab exams have been done. I think there's been a ton of interviews conducted. I think probably everything is pretty much gathered. All the evidence that there is to gather is probably gathered at this point. And I think that Clearly it's being evaluated now. As we speak right now, the team of investigators are at the FBI Academy presenting the evidence there, going over it again. So we're kind of at that stage of the game right now.
What's the most incriminating evidence that you are aware of?
Well, I think it's the totality of the circumstances. There's no smoking gun here. There's no one piece of evidence that points directly at anyone, and that's the nature of these cases. Many times, is they tend to be circumstantial in nature, and I think that's what we're going to find in this case. If we had one really compelling piece of evidence, it would have come forward by now, and we may have had charges. But the fact that it hasn't, I just don't think there is any one piece of evidence.
And no motive?
Well, the motive is, I suppose we could speculate about that. I mean, why did someone want this child dead? Clearly, there's some indication of sexual assault on the child. The autopsy reports show some vaginal trauma, some bleeding. So that could be a motive. But it's the totality of the circumstances with this child killed in the house on Christmas night. Now we have to put it in the time frame too. This is Christmas night. Killed in her house, and then the offender spent just an inordinate amount of time in that house, going up to the bedroom, getting the child out, doing some sort of assault, killing her, putting her in this room within in the basement in a bizarre area, then coming back up and getting a tablet from the house and writing the note. There's just so much that went on in the note that it's just unlikely this is an intruder, and I do think the investigation logically focuses on the family.
There's something I'd like to add is a practice note was also found on a pad of paper. So the person not only just composed that note, there was another note that was started, and that note was addressed Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey. And then they obviously changed their mind, and they started the note all over again on that same tablet of paper saying, Mr. Ramsey. So somebody spent a lot of time there thinking, what do I want to say? Which is, of course, completely inconsistent with, kidnapping.
What would you say to motive, though?
I think the one thing investigators believe at this point, and I can only speak for the various investigators I've interviewed, is that this was not a premeditated murder. They believe it was an accidental murder. They have several theories that I'm aware of, and then there was this elaborate cover-up to cover. So
a lot of stuff was done to cover up, to make it look.
Well, yes. I mean, even well-placed sources in the district attorney's office, which is very loath to, they're not inclined to prosecute the Ramseys. There's a real split house. The investigators, on the other hand, which is the police department, the FBI, and the CBI that have been consulting with the police department, however, they feel that the evidence points to the Ramseys, and that's what we've had. We've had, that's the gist of my story, you could say, is the rift and division, and I don't know whether it's reconcilable.
Okay, it was a gruesome murder, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. There was an 8.5-inch gash across her head. There's you have strangulation with a garrote made out of a paint stick. Now, this paint, around a month ago, I learned that the paint stick that was broken in half and they made a paintbrush stick was in fact one of Patsy Ramsey's paintbrushes. Now you could say that sounds very incriminating, but what the defense team will argue is, well, someone broke in and took her paintbrush and broke it in half and created a garrote. But in fact, it was made. She was an amateur painter, and it was made from her supplies. That, like what Greg said, is absolutely true. Is you have just kind of a big pile of circumstantial evidence, but no one big smoking gun. You have a kind of cleaned up, sanitized crime scene. Somebody, cleaned up the scene. A lot of the experts believe the child was redressed. Her clothes were. There's controversy about was she redressed or not. Her clothes looked pretty tidy and clean for somebody who was brutally bludgeoned and strangled. And she also, one of the things that's in this story is that there's odd touches. She's found in this basement storage room, but found with her is her very, very favorite possession in the world, according to one of her relatives, her pageant nightgown. It's, snuggled up with her. Well, usually if you're going in to kill a child, you wouldn't bother to get their favorite thing and put it alongside them. I mean, as Greg would tell you, they seize children, kill them, and throw them in a ditch. Yeah. You don't put your favorite blanket over them and that kind
Greg.
of...
This evidence, again, that's evidence that all offender behavior is significant. And when you look at that, it deals with caring and concern. And if you have caring and concern, as paradoxical as it may sound, you have that at homicide scenes. But what that tells you is that it's usually indicative of a pre-existing relationship. Even though there's been a homicide, there's caring and concern for the victim. So again, that's one more thing that weighs against a stranger. And if I might make one other point as well, when Ann was talking about this idea that some of the apparently the district attorneys believe that the Ramseys couldn't have done it because they're good Christians, they're nice people, and so forth. This is the wrong way to go about an investigation. And this is a trap that people fall into sometimes. We want child killers, especially child killers, a heinous crime, to be different than you and I. And we're not comfortable when they are like us. We want them to have a hunchback and drool one eye in the center of their forehead and drag a leg behind them when they walk and all that. The reality is, though, that murders and child murders are committed by people who are otherwise very nice people. And we just don't want that to be true, and it's an unsettling thing, and sometimes people have trouble getting over it. But that can't be what drives the investigation. The facts have to drive the investigation, and the theories have to emerge from the facts, not some preconception whether someone could do this or not do it.
I think that's really so with the Ramseys is that you have John Ramsey, who's made $1 billion company. You have Patsy Ramsey, who was a great beauty herself. I mean, and have led seemingly exemplary lives. It's just very inconsonant. One of the things that helped me with their work on this case was I spoke with Marilyn Vanderburg, who was the woman who was also Miss America, who came forth with her story of incest and also lived in Denver. And she explained to me, she said, "You don't understand, I came from one of the most prominent families in Denver. My father, in fact, erected that large cross that towers over the city. And he also molested her and all the children in her family and all the local girls." And it was just so striking to me how you could have this kind of pillar of respectability at odds. And I don't think that we're willing to accept that. And that's why, there is so much of giving the benefit of the doubt to the parents, even though, they're also equally suspect. It's just really hard to put it all together.
I just find it, Greg, so incomprehensible, parents killing children. That's just incomprehensible to imagine.
It is. I agree with you. I'm a parent, and I suppose any parent will tell you have bad days some days, but you just don't kill your child. I had a case that I was involved in Georgia where a mother was accused of killing her daughter. It was a circumstantial case, as many of those cases are. We helped the prosecution, helped the investigators who'd done a very good job. The prosecutors did a great job with the prosecution. They got a conviction, and a just conviction in the case. Later, one of the jurors, the members of the jury told us, she said, when I started this case at the beginning, I'm a mother. I just couldn't believe that a mother could kill her daughter, but after hearing the evidence, how could it be any other way? And statistically, we know this, that, like I say, 12 to 1, and probability that family members or caregivers, someone close to the child, kills a child, and the younger the child, the higher that probability. Infants, over 70% of infants are killed by their parents.
Thank you both. This is the only story we've really done about this case, and it comes at a time that we at least have some information and somebody that really has been out there and written about it and interviewed, as you say, more than 100 interviews or whatever, and at the same time